Coming up, is Egor Demin the star point guard the Nets have been waiting for? I'll dive into that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And on today's show, I'm going to be diving into the Nets' somewhat shocking 2025 NBA draft, looking at their 5 first-round selections NBA record, diving into that from a philosophical standpoint, and also focusing on Egor Demin and whether he has bust potential or potential star upside for the Nets. And I'm joined now by Derek Parker, draft analyst who runs his own YouTube channel, also writes for On SI. And Derek, there's a need amongst the fan base to understand what the Nets did in this draft. Obviously, an NBA record, 5 first-round picks they made. They shocked everyone at 8 with Egor Demin, and then they took 3 international ball handlers. But the volume of picks, the philosophy of targeting multiple guys who play the same positions and have similar attributes, let's start there. So when you saw the Nets kind of go with this overall philosophy, keeping all these picks, targeting players some people would call redundant, just what was your initial reaction and what did you make of it?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by other people's reaction in the moment, before I really took to Twitter to see what other people were saying and Reddit and whatever. I thought it was fine. I mean, I come from a small market, I'm in Oklahoma City. I covered the Thunder. This is what the Thunder did early in their rebuild. I mean, they obviously traded for Shea. They then took Josh Giddey. They got J-Dub, Jalen Williams, who can handle the ball. They stuck with redundancy. And so I understood from Brooklyn's point of view, gambling on all these guys who, yeah, they might not all be able to shoot and they might have a little bit of overlap across the board. But I think people that were expecting them to leave with 5 really great seamless contributors were probably living in a fantasy land. So using all these picks to gamble on trying to get at least one elite person in the handling role, and then probably at least a few other guys who will be able to back them up or play on the wing or do more ancillary things. I thought it was a fine gamble. So I'm excited to talk about it and jump into it.
Yeah, I think everybody was just surprised that they made all 5 picks because there had been so many rumblings about the trade up possibilities, and just that's logically where your mind goes. And them not trading up, I know it wasn't for a lack of trying. They talked with other teams about moving up further into the top 10. I'm sure they investigated some, lottery move up possibilities. But yeah, when you're talking about making all these picks, the way I've been looking at it is the Nets are so devout of young talent right now. They just don't, their best players, they have Cam Thomas is their young guy, I guess you could say. But in addition to that, Nick Claxton, he's 26, on the younger side, but kind of in the middle. Cam Johnson doesn't really fit a rebuilding timeline. They don't have anybody in that, 18, 19 to 21 range who you would consider a high level prospect. So for the people who saying that these guys don't fit together, I feel like the Nets are just in talent acquisition mode at this point for these guys. And they're trying to make as many dart throws as they can. And they're trying to see if a few of them stick regardless of position. But the first dart throw they made, I think, shocked everybody when they took Egor Demin at 8th overall, a player who has a really intriguing skill set, but consensus draft, opinion, I think that was a little high for him relative to where you had him on your board. Did you consider that pick a little bit of a reach when they made it?
I would say a little bit of a reach, sure. I don't think it was necessarily a bad pick. I mean, I think there were other teams in their range that wanted Egor Demin. I mean, and obviously, I'm sure you've talked about, or I'm sure people have seen on Twitter, the Thunder reportedly wanted to trade up and go get Egor Demin. And anybody the Thunder want to go get can't be terrible. But I think, sure, was it great asset management? No, but is it necessarily a bad pick? Was it so much of a reach that it's all life altering? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, and when you talk about Demin as the player, we discussed, I had you on for a prior episode and we talked about the Nets targeting upside. And we didn't think that it was really a question that they were going to be looking at upside. There was a good chance they were going to be looking at ball handlers. And we talked about the realistic guys who could be available for them with that 8th pick. And, we talked about Jeremiah Fears. He goes off the board. We talked about Trey Johnson and Con Knipple. They go off the board. Obviously, Ace Bailey was another guy who was somewhat linked to them. He's off the board. So if you're looking for an upside pick, an upside ball handler, the other options, Kasparas Yakachonis, the guy we talked about, but he ends up falling all the way to 20. So it's not that shocking that they went with Demin at that pick when you look at it through that lens. I think some people thought that they could have gone after Kaman Maluach, who obviously I think there's a little bit of a debate amongst, what his upside is. He's viewed as a little bit of a safer pick, but some people, think that he does have the upside. Assuming that those are probably two of the leading candidates for them there, would you have preferred, for in Brooklyn situation for them to go with a player like Maluach?
Definitely no. I mean, I think in Brooklyn's situation, I would absolutely swing for upside. As we touched on, I mean, most of the guys we covered were upside swings. Yakuchonis was an upside swing. Jeremiah Fears, upside swing. Egor Demin, obviously, he's like the pinnacle of upside swings in this draft. And leaving with Maluach to me, especially when I know that Claxton may not fit the rebuilding timeline, but especially when you have Claxton, like you would basically have to almost immediately offload him for Maluach to get any type of burn. So no, I much preferred the Demin pick in their situation. And honestly, I think this will end up working out better than simply drafting for fit or drafting like a lower ceiling player would have.
All right, coming up after a short break, we're going to get into Demin's skill set, the case for him, the case against him, and why we think the Nets ultimately landed with him at the number 8 pick. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Guys, look, it's the summer. There's a lot to do out there. Maybe you're going out to eat more, going out to a ball game, going to a concert, any of those things along those lines. You got to budget. You got to know what you're spending on. Monarch Money makes it easy to track all of that and meet your financial goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Coming out of the break, talking with Derek Parker, NBA draft analyst, about the Nets' shocking selection at number 8, taking Egor Demin, BYU point guard. And I think the skill set, people know, what the skill set is with Demin now at this point. Very high field player. He's massive for a lead ball handler, 6'9", 6'10" wingspan, probably best passer in the draft. You said that you think that this is going to work out a lot better than, some people have reacted to it. What gives you, what's the case for Demin, and what gives you hope that he could, wind up being a good value for the Nets with the 8th pick?
Yeah, I think in my evaluation, I didn't necessarily come away with anything different than anybody else. I think athletically, not great. As you touched on, I think he's the best passer in the class. I think that's very apparent when you dive into the tape. The thing that jumped out most to me will be his role malleability. I don't think he's necessarily pigeonholed to being a point guard. I don't think he's necessarily pigeonholed to being a wing or even a forward. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's 19 years old. Athletically, he probably stands to get a little better. He will fill out more. He might get a little quicker. I don't necessarily bank on speed and first step coming around, but I mean, he'll get more coordinated. He'll bulk up. He'll just get bigger and older and wiser, and he just stands to grow as a player regardless of whether he's great or good or bad. He will get better in some capacity, and I think that lends itself so well to him playing a variety of different roles. Maybe if he really does gain some speed and some size and some physicality and he can capitalize on mismatches, then he's a point guard and he can play point guard. But if not, I think the shooting stands to come around. I think he'll be able to play on the wing. He's just a smart enough player. Like you touched on, he has some of the best feel for the game in the class. I trust that he'll make the right play pretty constantly, pretty consistently. So, and then if he really does bulk up to some big range, then he'll be able to play legit forward too. I think he'll maybe even be able to play in some sort of pick and roll mindset. Maybe he'll just the way they got such malleable ball handlers, maybe he'll be able to run actions on the other end with like a Traore or a Saraf or whoever. So I just think he'll be a malleable player in general. And that gives me some hope moving forward that even if he isn't like a true number one lead guard, that he will have positive impact on an NBA team in some capacity.
And I think the positional versatility is huge. And I'm glad that you brought that up because it's something that I wanted to touch on. I think it's something that ultimately played a significant role in the Nets taking him at number 8. We talked with Sean Marks after the draft, immediately after the draft. And one of the things that he brought up was the direction the NBA is going in terms of, scheme versatility, positional versatility, defensive versatility. Defensively, I don't think anybody thinks that Demin's like a great defender at this point, but I would say based on Sean's comments, it seems like the Nets were higher than consensus on what he could be defensively. And then if we're talking about him playing, multiple positions outside of point guard on the other end, it's probably going to hinge on his shooting development. And I want to dig into the shooting, briefly because it's a huge aspect of, Yegor's development. He started off the season hot from 3. He, went really cold after that. He had a little bit of a knee issue, but he ended up at 27% from 3, I think. I'm pretty high volume, but that was the main concern because he's not a guy who's elite separating from people. The handle isn't, elite relative to some of the other ball handlers in this class. So him being able to shoot it at a respectable to good level is going to be huge for him to, create advantages and do those things offensively. We talked to Sean. All the reports, I'm sure you heard them, was that he shot the cover off the ball in his pre-draft workouts.
Mm-hmm.
We saw the pro day video out in Chicago, and Sean told us that pretty much said he wasn't worried about it because that he showed us that he can absolutely shoot at HSS, and that's practice facility, during his workout. That's what he said. So you said you suspect the shooting is going to come around as well, I think. What gives you confidence that he's going to be able to develop in that area and be somebody who can make NBA defenses pay from beyond the arc?
Yeah, funnily enough, I think it is confidence. Like, the form is fine. Obviously, the numbers weren't great. Like, it's the classic draft case of like everything is going perfectly except for the fact that the ball doesn't go in. Like, just happens. That sometimes happen, especially over such small sample size in a 1-year sample. But he's just such a confident shooter. Like, he never shies away from doing that. Obviously, in the interviews that you touched on, like he said, like, I'm gonna be a good shooter. I know I'm gonna be a good shooter.
Yeah.
I love that mindset moving forward. And then the confidence that the Nets have in him, like you just touched on again, like the fact that they're so confident that he'll shoot the ball, like an NBA organization with multiple scouts, they've got an entire office dedicated to like figuring out whether this guy's going to be able to do it or not. Like, that gives me some confidence moving forward in him that I think maybe it was just a 1-year sample of like, yeah, he dealt with some little nagging issues. I mean, he was totally new to the situation. He's an international guy. So like, he's coming in. This is a very, very different experience for him. And I think he just didn't shoot well. And I think that's just what happened. So I don't know that he'll be like some high volume scorcher for his whole career, but I think he'll certainly be able to knock shots down in some capacity.
And, assuming, which it's a tough assumption, but if he is able to knock down 3-point shots and be somewhat of a threat off the dribble and off the catch, that's going to unlock the positional versatility that you were referring to before. And I think that that's been an interesting conversation coming out of this draft because he's really been labeled as a point guard. Like, he's an elite passer, ball handler. I understand why, because of those skills that he has, but he does have the size, as you said, to play numerous other positions. So while it's kind of difficult to pigeonhole him into one spot at this point, what do you feel is the most likely position where he's going to spend the most time, assuming that he is able to get that 3-point shooting to come around?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really high on his passing ability, and I think he's got a decent enough handle that he would be able to function at the lead guard. But my heart right now just says that he'll be a wing. I just think that there's probably going to be better lead guard options. Like, there's just not a ton of these guys spread across the league. And the guys that are like in his archetype are 99th percentile outcomes and like a Luka Doncic and things like that. So I think that's going to be tough to hit just like based on, I mean, again, I covered Josh Giddey. That is probably the NBA comparison. And he was pretty much a dynasty starts after you type player, like, unfortunately for him. So I think that he will probably be best served on the wing. I think he'll shoot the ball better than Giddey. I think he'll play better defense than Josh Giddey. So I would anticipate him to play the wing moving forward. But that shouldn't stop Brooklyn from rolling him out in a point guard capacity, both for the next few years and even down the line. Like, maybe he'll start the game on the wing and then play backup point guard with the reserves. Like, as we've touched on, there's no limit to the versatility that he has.
Yeah, and I think that last line is a great way to kind of sum up a big part of what led the Nets to select him and gave them confidence in his upside there. Because if that jump shot is able to come around, that positional versatility just gives you so much optionality in how you craft your lineups in terms of having a guy who can be the wing, a guy who can carry second units. It just gives you, a lot more options in the different, rotations and lineups that you roll out. And, if the jump shot is able to come around, you said, seeing him more as a wing, that I feel like completely changes the calculus on how you evaluate this pick. Also, a big criticism of it was the Nets took 3 lead ball handlers. How do these guys fit together? How do they play together? If he's a guy who can shoot and play the wing and kind of be this connective playmaker, that adds, just a whole nother element to, what they do. So I think that's something that I think fans and, draft people may have been discounting a little bit in terms of where the upside lands on him. But I think there also are some really, glaring concerns that could, that led to him, falling on a lot of draft boards. So we'll touch on some of those and whether we think he'll be able to round out those aspects on his game after a quick break. The MLB season is heating up, and every game brings clutch hits, standout pitching, and unforgettable moments. From walk-off homers to no-hitters in the making, there's no shortage of drama on the diamond and no better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Look, guys, maybe you're watching the Yankees, Aaron Judge and the Bronx Bombers are just on a tear offensively. You could combine prop bets from multiple hitters. If you get a read on who's heating up, why not back it up with a same-game parlay? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking with Derek Parker, YouTube draft analyst and writer for On SI. And we talked about Egor Demin's strengths, some of the things that we think made him an upside pick for the Nets at 8. But there obviously, there's some perceived bust potential with this pick. So let's start there. Where do you view his floor? Because I think a lot of people were surprised to see them take him at this spot because they do think that, there is bust potential and Sean Marks could come out of this, with like some egg on his face, for lack of a better term. How do you, where do you view his floor? And do you think that there is, a decent chance that he could end up being a bust at the next level?
Yeah, I mean, very truthfully, the floor is about as low as it goes. Like, there's a chance that if things don't pan out, like if across the board he does not get better athletically, he cannot shoot the ball, he simply can't hold up against NBA defense, like he just won't be a playable player. Like, he's going to have to get stronger. He's going to have to play with more physicality. Ousmane Dieng kind of like jumps out to me as a player who has kind of seen that pathway. Like Ousmane Dieng, again, 6'9", was able to handle the ball, did a lot of things in the pick and roll, was supposed to have defensive versatility, could really pass it, but just hasn't really caught up to NBA physicality. Like, he just kind of crumbles under pressure and defensively isn't quite where he should have been. So that's a realistic outcome. Maybe not realistic, but it's a potential outcome for Demin if everything doesn't go his way. Now, some of these things will. Like, I mean, NBA prospects develop so differently and at different times. Like Ousmane Dieng, for that matter, is still in the league and was still chosen over Dylan Jones to be on the Thunder roster. So I think he'll be able to develop in a few areas, but the floor is very low.
Yeah, and talking about why that floor is low, obviously the shooting, goes without saying. If he can't develop the shot, that's viewed. I spoke to you on our last time we talked, and you said you viewed that as the swing skill, for him in terms of if he's not able to do that, it's going to make so many other things, his pick and roll prowess, all those things, a lot more difficult to shine. The other part of it is, the ball handling. I think there's multiple things we'll touch on. Let's start with the ball handling because he's not a guy who's, very shifty laterally. He doesn't have an elite handle by any stretch of the imagination. I think he showed pretty good, like straight line speed. Like, he's a strider. If he's gotten a lane, he's been able to get there if he sees an opening and finish. But, the handle is a really big concern, the lack of, lateral agility, because the thing that you hear from all these draft analysts is how is he going to score, outside of the pick and roll or do anything like that. So how much of a concern is that for you? And do you view him as a guy where the Nets have some potential to unlock some kind of self-creation? Or do you think he's really just going to be more of this guy that you're spamming pick and roll with and you're trying to, create some openings for him that way?
Yeah, I think it's one of the absolute toughest things to project as like a draft guy and just in general. Like, I think anybody who knows when a handle is going to get better is probably working in a front office right now. Like, that's just how it works. It's so hard to predict because so many things have to line up. Like, your coordination has to get better. You have to get quicker, faster, shiftier. Like, you have to work on it a lot. Like, obviously, the players that have drastically raised their handle, some of the like Kawhi Leonard type guys have just like put in the work over the years. So everything I've heard about Demin right now seems like he's one of those guys who'll stay in the gym and work on it. But it is a concern. I think players just naturally get better in this area. I think the like very ball screen heavy NBA obviously helps. Like, yeah, he can't really score outside of the pick and roll right now, but you could also just hammer the pick and roll consistently and only do that. Like that's the nature of the NBA right now is pick and roll basketball. So it's a concern, but I do anticipate him to get better. Now, to what degree he gets better is probably directly affecting like where he lands in his career. Like if he doesn't improve at all, maybe he hits that low outcome. If he gets way better, maybe there's star upside there. So certainly something to keep an eye on moving forward with Yegor.
And another thing that I think hasn't been talked about enough is, the concerns about him are in the half court offense, all of those things, but he's an elite playmaker and you don't only play in the half court in basketball. There's a transition game, and that's really important, I know, to Jordi Fernandez and the way that he wants to play. And we were talking to Yegor in his press conference right after he got picked. I asked him, what were the conversations like? How did they say they could see you fitting in? And one of the things he was saying was Jordi really talking to me about, how I can be a grab and go guy and push the pace and find some of the athletes that they're going to have. Like they took Drake Powell, a really athletic guy. I think will pair nice in transition with him. So his skill set and what you saw from him at this year in BYU, how do you think it can kind of lend itself to that transition game?
Yeah, I think for all the places he might not be the greatest, like he's going to be really good in this area. Like he probably has the best combination of velocity, accuracy, processing that I've ever seen in a passer. And obviously he's 6'9". He's going to be able to have the grab and go potential, get boards. It's hard to keep coming back to this, but I covered Josh Giddey extensively while he was here. They're the same type of like playmaker, like in the best way possible. Like Mark Daignault talks about it often. You need a guy who can like kickstart offense. Like it's not necessarily ever going to be flashy. Like it's not going to be behind the back, like cross court ropes constantly, but just a guy who really gets the ball moving, pushes the pace, like really changes the dynamic of the entire offense opposed to just like making the one cool pass that ends up an assist. Like I think Egor Demin's that guy. And whether he's playing lead guard, wing, forward, whatever, I think he'll be able to be that guy pretty consistently.
And what you said, just having a guy who keeps the ball moving, makes the right play. Like Sean Marks was talking about the philosophy of picking all of these, ball handlers who are high IQ, high feel, pass first. And the thing he said was it's 0.5 second basketball. You don't hold the ball, you keep it moving. So they were clearly, placing a really high premium on that. And I think a lot of that is going to shine in the transition game. He's also a guy from the shooting perspective. If you watch him, he was comfortable pulling up in transition and taking some pull-up threes. So the confidence, if he can develop in that area, the passing ability, like maybe this could end up being a guy who has Ben Simmons, like, ball handling, transition passing ability, but maybe can shoot a little bit too. And that would be a pretty good player, obviously, a pretty, hopeful outlook for him, obviously. Last thing I want to touch on of his weaknesses is he's going to need to fill out. Like he has great size at 6'9", but he's a pretty slight frame. And I don't think he finished well, percentage wise at the rim, but I think there are concerns about how he'll match up with the physicality and being able to, deal with guys who are getting up into him from a ball handling perspective and also finishing at the rim when you get some contests there. So how do you feel about that aspect of his game, the finishing and just the overall, being able to match up with the physicality that NBA defenders are going to bring?
Yeah, maybe more than anything, that's like the biggest jump for these players is the physicality. Like you go from college where you're seeing 6'1" point guards and guys who obviously just aren't as great. And then you go to the NBA where it's like everybody is the biggest, the baddest, bigger, faster, stronger. Like it's a huge jump. It's something so many players struggle with, and especially ones that don't have that kind of physicality built in. So the good news is that he has great touch. Like he's got touch in that mid range. He's got touch around the basket. So even when he is physically outmatched, I think he'll be able to create advantages still. He'll still be able to capitalize wherever it is. But he needs to fill out. And I would expect him to. I mean, again, this guy's 19 years old. Like, he looks to have the frame to put on muscle and things like that. So I think he'll be fine. And just another area to kind of keep an eye on.
All right, closing this out, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Obviously, this is somewhat of an impossible question because so many things have to develop, so many things, it's going to be such a long time before we know the answer. But based on what you've seen with him and how you feel about, his skill set, his player archetype, where the NBA is going, all those things, what would you say, or what would you guess is kind of the most likely outcome for where he lands as a player?
Yeah, I'm excited that he landed with the Nets. I think it's a great developmental system. I think there were a few other places that had Yegor landed, I wouldn't be as high on him, but I think this is a good spot. He'll be able to iron out the kinks early and then just be able to kind of grow as a good basketball player for the foreseeable future. So I would expect him to be a positively impactful player. I don't know that he'll necessarily be a number 1 or 2 scoring option, but I think he'll be a starting level wing. I think he'll be one of the heavy rotation guys, a guy who can finish games. I don't know how far I want to go with this. Like, is he a 16-game player? That I'm uncertain of, but in the least, I think he will be a good NBA starter with a high ceiling that the Nets can hopefully maximize.
All right, Derek, really appreciate you taking the time. If you guys don't already, go check out Derek's work on his YouTube channel and also follow his writing on SI. Does just a great job. Has a really great video on Yegor on his Heat Check series. So definitely go check that out. And yeah, appreciate you taking the time and look forward to following more of your work, man.
Appreciate it.
That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys really enjoyed the talk with Derek. Think he did a really great job encompassing all aspects of the Nets draft philosophy and also the case for and against Egor Demin. So go check out his stuff on YouTube. And if you don't already, be sure to subscribe to this show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, make sure to like, comment, anything you guys can do to engage is much appreciated as I try to build this channel. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.